This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha. This week we've got another terrific video, and I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to get right into it. And you can see the title there on the screen. My boyfriend, 25-year-old male, ghosted me, 23-year-old female, after I slept with an aging bodybuilder, age 62. Yes, that's right, 62. So let's get into the story. But before we do, I want to point out right up front that this story clearly illustrates how many women act on emotion without thinking, then often regret their actions later. And I think this is a key difference between men and women. Men oftentimes will think about things before they do them. And many women, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say most women act on emotions. So instead of thinking through things up front, they often will act on their emotions and then regret it later. And this comes to play in this story in terms of the affair that this woman has. And you'll see that as we go through the story. So let's get into it. You can see the posting date here was September 13th of 2022. And she starts out by saying, I made a terrible mistake and I'm afraid I will be paying for it the rest of my life. Call me Cindy, 23-year-old female, and my boyfriend Cameron, 25 male. Cameron and I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. Since he was a couple years older than me, we knew of each other, but didn't know each other on a personal level. We got to know each other better just over 3 years ago at the grocery store where I worked as a cashier. When Cameron came home from college on weekends or breaks, he often would stop in our store and pick up prepared foods and a kombucha tea for lunch. I worked the express line, and he'd often check out at my register if he was there when I was working. He was always polite and very kind, and I thought he was so cute. Hearing his voice just made me melt inside and gave me tingles. I gave him many nonverbal cues of my interest, but he never picked up on them. Then one day, when he was checking out and my line was slow, I decided to ask him a question about his major, and we started talking. I just kept asking him questions to display my interest, and after about 10 minutes, he got the hint. Soon, a couple of shoppers with baskets started making a beeline for my register, and Cameron said, It looks like you're getting busy. Here, let me give you my number, which he then wrote down on the receipt I gave him. He left and said to call him whenever I was free. This was a Saturday, and I got off work at 3 p.m. As soon as I got out of work and reached my car, I called him and we talked for 2 hours. He invited me to dinner that night, and I accepted. We hit it off immediately and were intimate on our second date, which happened the following day before he left to go back to school. So within 24 hours of really getting to know each other, they were intimate. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just wanted to point that out. I know it's crazy, she says, but I fell head over heels in love with him that weekend. We continued to see each other every weekend as Cameron would either drive home or I would drive to the college to be with him. Things were going great. Cameron graduated and got a good job in the city. He bought a new Wrangler, so I'm assuming here a Jeep Wrangler, and got a nice apartment in the city near where he worked. A few months later, he asked me to move in with him, and I immediately accepted. Our parents weren't too keen on us cohabitating before marriage, but were supportive of our relationship as they liked both of us. Cameron explained to me and to them that this was our trial run to see if we were compatible for marriage. She says I was thrilled, and she has a couple of heart emojis here to really show that she was really excited about all of this. Things were excellent between us, and we were thoroughly enjoying living in the big city after living in a small rural town all of our lives. There was just so much to do and so many smart, interesting people. We just fit right in. I got a job at a locally owned coffee shop just a few blocks from our apartment. I loved working there. The owners were so nice and our customers were so interesting. I met so many great people and still keep in touch with most of my regulars through social media. Cameron and I had been living together nearly 9 months now, and he had been living in the apartment over 10 months. So we started looking around at other apartments in the area. We loved our place, but were curious to see what else was available. We must have looked at over a dozen places. It was fun seeing all the different apartment designs and layouts. If we were going to move, Cameron would have to give written notice to the landlord 30 days before his lease expired, or it would automatically renew. Now keep that in mind as we go through this story because it's going to come into play. Fast forward a month, and I had joined a local yoga class that was in walking distance of our apartment in the opposite direction of my coffee shop. One of the regulars at the yoga studio was a man who was also a regular at the coffee shop. Let's call him Ed for privacy purposes. Now enter Ed into this story and you can see where this is going to go. Ed is a good-looking older man with a muscular body. I gauged his age to be around late 40s, about the same as my parents. Ed was always very friendly with all of us, she says in capital letters, at the coffee shop, and would talk extensively to everyone. And she has in parentheses here, she says, not just me. He would talk to everyone at the shop. So she's trying to point out, hey, it wasn't just me talking to him. Everybody was talking to this Ed. He'd work on his laptop for a couple of hours every day in our shop. He told us all he was an entrepreneur, and I thought he must have been successful as he drove a new Bronco and wore nice clothes, shoes, and jewelry. So you can see just from her writing here, this woman is very materialistic because she's focusing in on what this Ed has. And also she mentioned before, hey, her boyfriend now has a new Wrangler and he's got a nice apartment. So she's very materialistic. She says, well, let me cut to it. One day Ed and I were talking and I asked him about yoga. I was curious, knowing he was really into it, and asked if he'd recommend the studio he attends. He did and said I should definitely take up yoga as I'd love it. I toured the place, and again here she says in capital letters, on my own, and really liked it. Plus, it was within walking distance of our apartment. Cameron belonged to a large gym that was located across the street from his office, but that was over 20 minutes away. 35 minutes with traffic, so that wouldn't work for me as I didn't want to drive my beat up old Saturn that far. I started attending the classes and absolutely loved it. I typically would go right after my shift ended at 2 p.m. This worked out great as I had a routine of working from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., then going to the studio until 3:30 p.m., and then heading home and cooking dinner for Cameron. One day at the shop, Ed asked me how I liked the studio, and I told him I loved it and thanked him for the recommendation. He asked what time I went, and I told him I go right after work at 2 p.m. Ed said he might be seeing me there around this time as he was going to start taking a hot yoga class a couple of days a week, which starts at 1:30 p.m. His plan was to do regular yoga twice a week and hot yoga twice a week. He also said he spends 3 to 5 days a week at a local gym lifting and boxing. So this guy was definitely into physical fitness, as you can see. A couple of days later, I saw Ed at the studio. We talked like we do at the coffee shop, and he convinced me to try hot yoga, which I eventually did and loved it. As days went by, we were spending more and more time together at the studio and taking classes together. Looking back now, I can see how inappropriate this was, but at the time, the thought never entered my mind. This went on for weeks until one day, now listen to what she says here. She says, until one day, I don't know why or how, Ed and I ended up back at Cameron's apartment on a Thursday afternoon and did something terrible, which I thoroughly regret now. I felt awful about what I had done, but now listen to this now. But I did agree to meet Ed again the following Monday at his place, as I didn't want to disrespect Cameron by bringing Ed back to his home again. So she said how awful she felt, but then she agrees to meet this guy, this Ed, again at his place. And she's kind of playing it off saying, I wanted to meet him at his place because I didn't want to disrespect Cameron. Well, ma'am, you are disrespecting Cameron by having an affair on him. My God. Sheesh. Ed's apartment was scary, she says, in a kind of rough neighborhood. He only had a couple of old chairs, a TV, a kitchen table with two chairs, a small double bed, and an old dresser. Now, again, you see that materialistic mindset of hers, because that's the first thing she's focusing on. She says, it was not what I expected, and I was going to leave. And she says here in parentheses, I wish I did, but didn't want to be rude. He definitely was not a successful entrepreneur and must have put all of his money into his car, his clothes, and jewelry because he definitely didn't put it into his home. After that get together, I told Ed we'd have to end our relationship because I love my boyfriend and don't want to lose him. Ed looked at me cynically and laughed, saying, there's no way you love your boyfriend and just did what you did. I told him I do love him more than anything. He said, well, you may love him, but you desire me way more than him. Reality hit me hard, and I said, no, I don't. That's not true. I gathered my things and got out of there. Leaving Ed's apartment, I just felt so dirty and stupid for what I'd done. I'm not like this. Honestly, I'm not. I don't know. Things with Ed happened at a time of month when my hormones seem uncontrollable. Well, lady, let me tell you, all women have hormones. And guess what? There's a thing called self-control. You just don't act out on these things like you did in this case. It's not an excuse, she's saying. I'm just trying to rationalize what I did. I cried the rest of the afternoon until Cameron came home. We ate dinner, watched TV, and hung out on the couch, but I noticed Cameron was distant. He hadn't been feeling well for several days, so I thought it was that. On Tuesday, he acted normal, but was still distant, saying he still felt a little off. We hadn't been intimate for nearly a week now, and I was getting worried about his health as we never abstained. Looking back, I think he knew about Ed and I and was keeping his distance. Well, if he did know about you back then, and I believe he did, he's a smart man. On Wednesday, I arrived home just before 3 p.m. Now listen to what happens here, folks. And went for my apartment key, but it wasn't on my ring. I started to panic thinking it must have fallen off. The key ring wasn't broken and all my other keys were on there, just not the apartment key. I then thought the key must have broken off, but how? Then I thought, did someone take it off my ring to rob our apartment? Looking back now, I know Cameron removed it, so this Cameron must have removed it off of her key ring in the morning before she left that day. I tried calling Cameron several times and texted him, but didn't get a response. This was unusual as he normally would send me a quick text back saying he was busy. I thought, well, let me go to the office and have them let me in as they have keys to all the apartments in our building. I went to the office and explained to one of the coordinators, and she went back to the manager's office and shut the door. A few minutes later, they had me come back into the office and sit down. The manager explained to me that Cameron had moved out that morning and gave a cancellation letter to terminate the lease at the end of the 1-year term. Hearing this, I just said, "What?" and burst out crying. The manager said Cameron left several bags of things for you here, which they had locked in the adjacent office. They walked me over to the office, and there were 3 big laundry bags with all of my personal belongings, including several gifts I had bought Cameron over the years. I now realized that he knew about Ed and I just fell apart right in front of these ladies. They helped me carry the bags out and load them in my car. They also asked me to sit down for a few minutes as they didn't want me driving in my condition. The manager asked if there was someone they could call for me. I told them no, I'll be all right. I said I was going to sit in my car and gather my composure before leaving. I asked if Cameron left a forwarding address. They said he did, but they couldn't give it to me for privacy reasons. They gave me a couple of bottles of water, granola bars, and a box of tissues. They were both so kind to me and helped me from doing something stupid. I sat in my car for over an hour crying, wondering what I was going to do. I called and texted Cameron countless times on both his cell and at his office, but he never responded. In one of the messages, I asked if I could stay in the empty apartment through the end of the lease since he paid for it, thinking he would respond to this question, but he didn't. I knew he was pissed. He didn't block me though, which gave me a little hope. I was going to go to his office and see if I could catch him when he was leaving, but decided against doing so as I didn't want to cause a scene at his job. If I did anything to jeopardize his job or professional reputation, he would never forgive me, as he was well respected in the company and has a bright career ahead of him. Instead, I just decided to drive aimlessly around town for an hour, thinking about what I was going to do. I decided to check into a new Homestyle Suites hotel that opened near our apartment. They had a grand opening special of $79 per night, $3.99 per week. I had to get a place to lay down and think. The place was very nice, but I knew I couldn't stay there for more than a couple of weeks max, as I couldn't afford it. After settling in, I cried for the rest of the night and kept wondering how Cameron found out. The only thing I could come up with was, one, Ed told him, or told someone who told him, or he must have had cameras in the apartment. I hope it was number one, as I dread the thought of Cameron seeing me with another man. I felt like trash and a terrible person. How could I hurt the person I love most and who treated me so well? Now, we're at a point in this story where I want to encourage you, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, hit that like button, because what that will do is move this video up on the YouTube algorithm and get it seen by people all over the world. So let's get right back to the story. She says the following day I got a call from my mother. She was very angry, angrier than I had heard her be before. She asked me, "What the hell did you do?" I told her I don't know what she was talking about. And she told me that she just got off the phone with Cameron's mother, and she said Cameron told her we broke up because I slept with an old man. "Is this true?" my mother asked. I just came out and said it was, and that I was sorry. My mom then proceeded to yell, scream, and cry at me for over 45 minutes, then hung up on me. After she hung up, my dad called and said he was so disappointed in me. Hearing this broke my heart. I asked if I could move back home. He said yes, but only if I agreed to see a psychiatrist. I think he meant a therapist, which I agreed to. I told him I was sorry and asked if he loved me. He said he does, but is beyond disappointed. I gave my notice at the coffee shop and moved back home 11 days later. During this time, I continued contacting Cameron, but he never responded. Doing research online, I read where it's best just to give a betrayed partner space, which I did, but it was destroying me inside. When I got back home, everyone in town knew about our breakup and the reason for it. This is just a nightmare, she says with a crying face. I want to ask here if there is any way to get Cameron back. I don't know how he found out or what he saw, but knowing him, I don't think he'll ever speak to me again. I love him more than anything and know I must do everything to try to win him back. Regardless of what happens, I'm going to regret what I did for the rest of my life. Thank you, and please be kind with your comments, she says. Okay, now I'm going to read some of the responses she got to her post. And let me just tell you, the overwhelming sentiment in the responses was negative towards her. However, there were some women and even a few men that were very supportive of her and encouraging of her. So let's read a few of them. First of all, the first one here is from a male. He says, "You are a disgusting piece of garbage. If your boyfriend takes you back, he is the biggest simp in the world and deserves to be cucked forever." The second response here, it's from a female. She says, "Hang in there. I did something similar 20 years ago when I was 20. My fiance never took me back, but 7 years later, I did get married to a nice man. You'll be okay eventually. It just takes time." Now, here's another response from a female. She says, "See a therapist. Your story is similar to mine. I found out through therapy our brains are not fully developed at that age, and we can act irrationally when hormones are involved. It's not totally in your control. Stay strong. You got this." So this woman is saying, hey, what you did really wasn't in your control because your brain wasn't developed fully and your hormones are raging at that age. So you just got to forgive yourself and go on. Totally not taking any responsibility for what she did. And then finally, this is from a man, this final response here. He says, "You should first forgive yourself, and then your boyfriend should forgive you." So obviously, this guy is more from the blue pill side of things. He said, "You acted in poor judgment, but it should not end your relationship. You and your boyfriend need to get into a relationship with God to help you through." So those are a few responses. And now let's get to her update. And her update is from September 30th. "Thanks to everyone who responded. I read and thought about every comment. Many of you were kind and understanding, and that gave me strength. However, there were some evil and just plain mean people who responded, and their statements really hurt me. I know what I did was terrible and inexcusable, but I shouldn't have to live in shame forever. I'm back home living with mom and dad and got a job as a cashier at a dollar store that opened in town. I'm still the talk of the town, or at least it seems that way. Almost everyone here knows my personal business, and I feel so embarrassed." Well, that's what happens when you live in a small town. That news is going to spread like wildfire throughout that town, and people will be talking about it 10, 20, 30 years from now. You're always going to be remembered as that woman who had a great boyfriend, but then she cheated on him with some old man and basically ended up back in town, broke, living at her parents' house again. She says, "Somehow people were able to identify Ed was the guy I cheated with and researched him online." And wait till you see what's up with this Ed. She says, "It turns out he's actually 62 years old." And she has like a face plant emoji there on the screen. "I had no idea. As I said before, I thought he was in his late 40s. Even worse, he has a record dating back 17 years. And she's not talking about a vinyl record that you put on a turntable and play music. She's talking about a criminal record, although she doesn't get into detail here. She says there are two newspaper articles about his previous arrest, and trial still online. I could have found all of this out by doing a simple online search, but was so distracted to do so. So she was deep into that affair fog. I still can't believe I did what I did. It's like I was another person during that time. I feel like such a fool now. Not only did I cheat on the man of my dreams, I cheated with a complete loser of a man. Hopefully, the gossip will fizzle out in a few months, as I don't think I can continue living in this town much longer, as it's crushing me mentally. Some days I feel like locking the door on my room and not coming out. And she's got crying face emojis here all over this page. My parents are mortified about what I did. They have told me with complete certainty that if I pull something like this again, they will disown me and have no regrets. They said I have thoroughly embarrassed the family, and they are ashamed of me. All of this made me feel even worse about myself, if that's even possible at this point. I've been really depressed. Through it all, Cameron has never contacted me. We've not spoken a word since the night before he locked me out of the apartment. I just wish he'd at least call me and yell at me or show some kind of emotion. All I want to do at this point is apologize to him in person. It would give me some level of closure. And that's really key here. Whenever you have a situation like this, when someone cheats on you, the best thing to do is immediately cut ties with them and cut them off and have no further contact. Number one, that's what you need to do for your own benefit. And number two, it will drive them crazy. As you can see here, she's just begging even for this guy to call her up and just yell at her, because what that would do is it would indicate to her that this man still cares about her and that he's hurt over the situation. But by him totally cutting her off, it is driving her insane. She continues on here and says, I've been in therapy for a couple weeks now, and it is helping. My therapist is thoughtful, but she is very blunt. On her advice, I have stopped reaching out to Cameron and have started focusing on myself. She explained that I've already apologized via text and voicemail. She said Cameron knows, but obviously does not want anything to do with you at this point. And she's got another crying face emoji here. She says, for the last week, I've been just focusing on work, eating well, getting rest, and going for long walks. I do feel better, but I still miss my partner. I'm taking things one day at a time and hoping Cameron and I will reconcile, but I'm living as if we will not. I have no plans to date anyone anytime soon, although I've had 4 customers at the store ask me out. I have no interest, as Cameron still controls my heart and mind. I don't plan on updating again unless we get back together. And she has another emoji here. She's really crazy with these emojis with a fingers crossed. She says, best wishes and my thanks to you all. So that's the story. And I think this guy handled this like a boss. I mean, the fact that he did a complete rug pull on her with that apartment and basically left her out on the street. Now, I'm not saying, that's necessarily a good thing to do. But in this case, he knew that she had the wherewithal to get shelter somewhere. So by him doing that rug pull on the apartment, man, that just hit her out of left field. And again, I think that's the appropriate thing to do. If someone cheats on you, immediately cut them off and cut all contact with them. That's the best thing you can do. Now, let me know what you think about this. Do you think he handled this well? Would you have handled it a different way? Have you been in a situation like this where you thought your girlfriend or your wife was just terrific, things were going well, and then out of the blue, she acts on emotions and totally upsets your world by having an affair? Tell us about it. Also, like this video if you enjoyed it. Hit that like button. Like I said, it moves it up on the YouTube algorithm. Share this video with your friends, and please subscribe to this great channel, and I will talk to you on the next one.